How do MSPs and MSSPs juggling what we're going through today? It's interesting for me to see and listen to all of the other presentations today, and it's scary, right? Like from a forester perspective of, quite literally, a lot of them won't be here anymore, and things are going to change, right? And I can put my perspective into it, but I'd love to hear from you guys what you think about, this whole new world of remote working possibly will be the new norm. How will MSPs be able, and MSSPs, be able to function, right? I mean, they've been functioning remotely for some time, right? But gearing up for that is going to be a challenge, right?
Right.
Michael, what would you say about that?
I think part of the discussions that we heard before previously, some folks said some interesting things, and that was specifically that MSSPs were forgetting about a lot of the smaller companies and also transitioning to doing remote work. Some of the bigger MSSPs and MSPs were basically concentrating on bigger customers. And I think when we have a situation such as this, where the remote workers are very important, and it's important for the security providers to actually go out to the different sites or to at least support them. These are the types of instances when we find out where people have invested correctly in this type of infrastructure and not. The second thing is it also tests through the new phishing attacks, scanning attacks, and general attacks on VPN infrastructure, whether people have patched their systems correctly, whether they have the service providers working on these specific solutions correctly and in a timely manner. So it exacerbates those companies that have not invested or divested in this type of infrastructure. And these are the moments where that comes out very brutally.
Yeah, I guess it also puts into place with, the security, right? How do you, we talked about this briefly in one of the other sessions, but, MDM comes into play, right? How do you manage this, right? You got your home networks that aren't really secure, let's be honest about it. And yet, how do we go forward? And I'm particularly worried about MSPs and MSSPs in the fact that, their staff will get sick, right? What's their contingency plan for that in itself? Let alone, there's no real contingency plan for everyone working from home, right? Ian, what do you think about that? Going forward, what other challenges can you see from an MSSP perspective?
Thanks, Neil. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the information's like, in the next few months when we start to gather a better picture as to what's really happened over the last few months, because throughout the whole presentations over the last hour or so, it's clear that there's going to be a lot of companies who have not really thought about home working strategically, who will, ultimately suffer. But how great they'll suffer, we really don't know what that looks like at the moment. We can only talk about what we've done for our customers confidently. We've had a little bit of insight from some other providers that we've worked with and so forth. And, it's quite clear that, if you've had a strategy set up in place, then really what's actually happened really hasn't affected those businesses that have had, a cloud-first strategy, or at least a capability to deploy and mobilize quickly. So that's been, that's what we've seen. Those companies that haven't, I'm yet to see what that fallout looks like. I think that's going to be another 4 weeks yet before we actually start to see the true impact of what's gone on with this home working deployment, both in the UK and obviously in the States and everywhere else in the world.
In technology, typically we always knee-jerk, right? It's
very
rarely that we have proactive measures in place. It's always after the horse has bolted, and we knew this was going to come sooner or later, going back to the days of bird flu back in 2003 and 4. It's like that was ready there and then, and it was a scare. Pandemics have always been there. But we've never really adjusted because we've always seen it as an additional cost with no benefit back. to plan for that kind of eventuality, you know. But it also gives rise, I guess, to things, additional hacking is a prime example. Phishing, absolutely. I've had so many phishing emails of late. It's untrue, really, and it's crazy. But I think service providers as a whole have a massive challenge on their plate, and you know it's not going to be an easy one to overcome. Guys, have any of you guys got any other thoughts, Richard or Paul? You know.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, it's Paul. I think service providers are not dissimilar to normal customers. The customers that, and we've talked about this through all the presentations, the customers that have invested in the cloud-first technology, have invested in two-factor authentication, have invested in remote working, have tested these procedures, are the ones that are going to have moved or transitioned into this phase fairly simply. And MSPs are very similar. The ones that have, I mean, we've been testing a business continuity plan since, I think, January, you know, steadily ramping that up. We have invested in the systems that enable our support teams to be able to work remotely. So I don't see there's much difference between an MSP and a normal business. The ones that are forward thinking, that have invested the time, the effort into it, are the ones that are going to ultimately be successful coming out of this phase.
Did you think that's from a business perspective of size, rather from the SME sector to the mid to large cap?
Yeah,
there's a massive difference. Right?
I think that helps. Obviously, they've got the resource. They can invest in the technology, but they can also use that resource to do the business continuity testing days to invest in it. So I think size does help, and we're an MSP around about 300 staff. So that obviously gives us a bit more scale and a bit more financial clout to implement those. But, you know, we're seeing, you know, small business sites, we look after a number of building sites that have transitioned to this cloud way of working really quickly. So, yes, I think size does help, but I think that's forward-thinking mentality is also obviously a great asset as well.
What do you think, Richard? Bring you into the conversation.
I read an article fairly recently that caused me more than a little bit of concern as opposed to most of the stuff that I read. The article was about the virus causing a home working issue in China, and the challenge there was people were running out because laptops are expensive there. Well, the challenge for them was they were running out to the secondary market, buying used laptops and using third-party untested collaboration tools to help them deal with this. When you're doing things like that, that's an absolute recipe for disaster. The small to medium-sized enterprises that have not got a home working even remotely set up and are just trying to scramble to do this are going to be quite a concern, particularly if they're providing additional threat vectors into larger companies as the big suppliers.
Yeah, it's difficult to set that kind of service up on the fly, you know. The capacity planning has to be key. And I mean, you only got to look at what's going on with Microsoft and the Azure stack take-up, right? It's incredible. I just look at those figures and you think, and then you read another article saying it's creaking, and it's actually like creaking to a halt. And even somebody like Microsoft in their infinite wisdom can't capacity plan enough for an environment and a pandemic like this, you know?
Well, I think, sorry if I could interject just a second there. I understand that Microsoft has invested a lot in their infrastructure, and there's different types of clouds that are out there. I think there are three topics, and I'll get to this a little bit later on when the other gentlemen have concluded, but I think part of the reason is the supply chain is really stressed out right now. And that's one of the things that we're seeing across the board, whether it's the VPN connections, whether it's the telecommunications infrastructure, these types of things like a pandemic, they show us where we've notoriously divested after the event of a potential nuclear war previously from the Cold War era. And I think because we've divested in a lot of these backup and emergency infrastructures, these types of pandemics are showing us what the results of that are. So I think in regards to newer types of cloud infrastructure, we have physical boundaries whether it's electricity, whether it's the buildings, whether it's the amount of metal servers that we have to basically implement these virtual servers and infrastructure and containers on. So I think Microsoft and every other cloud service provider out there has calculated a certain amount of demand. But the thing is, when the supply chain stress goes up and you can't plan for things like this because your disaster recovery planning didn't see to this and you didn't invest the money, this is when these things happen. So sorry, I just wanted to get back to Richard. Sorry, Richard.
No. That was a very, very interesting point. One of you gentlemen alluded to this earlier. One of the key kind of problems, even if you have a very mature home working protocol, is it's not designed to deal with a husband, a partner, or a wife, a couple of teenagers who are wanting to stream their Netflix and play Xbox while you're trying to do video calls and your partner's trying to do video calls. It's not designed for that, and the contention rate in these neighborhoods goes through the bloody roof.
Yeah. I've got to say, I'm fairly jealous of, I think it was Jay from Foresters that was living in, I think, Miami, and he'd got a swimming pool and the kids were in the swimming pool. I think, unfortunately, mine are on the same. All three devices are streaming Netflix or Instagram or something like that, and that you know, I agree, that's sharing the problems.
Yeah, or Fortnite, Paul. You know?
Yeah, I've got girls, so I don't have that problem.
It's a challenge, right? It's a challenge from the service provider perspective that you just don't gear up for that kind of sheer quantity of, you know, for connectivity is key. It's the plumbing at the end of the day, and the bottleneck is there. I mean, my home broadband itself peaks constantly, then it gets throttled down because I'm on it a lot, and you know, the more you're on it, the more it gets throttled down. You know, and then now we've got near enough most people working from home, and all their children.
I mean, and we're talking about the bottleneck this end at home going out, but how many customers tested all users coming in via a VPN? So as an MSP, we've seen a lot of customers rushing to upgrade firewalls to be able to take that extra capacity of, you know, going from 20 normal VPN users to maybe 120. So we've seen a lot of work going on at the sort of infrastructure end just to be able to enable, you know, the complete remote workforce working out of the office.
That's a very interesting point, Paul, and I'll put this to everyone: is, you know, should we stress test more vigorously for that type of environment and outcome? You know, so I know it's difficult to say that, but you can get emulators to a degree of what you could simulate that for. Do you think from an MSP point of view and an MSSP, should they be duty bound to conduct such stress testing to know that they can accommodate that kind of capacity?
I'll make my point and then I will be quiet and let some other panelists speak. But I mean, we see in all aspects of our services. So we do instant response. So when I go to an instant response, maybe they've had a ransomware attack, all servers are encrypted. Well, suddenly the restore time is now 3 or 4 days, because when they've been testing, they've only been testing recovery of the domain controller or recovery of the application server. So I think this is going to expand out that, yes, we should be doing much more testing and at a bigger scale, really, just to try and simulate these types of situations.
Yeah.
Neil, I think it'll be interesting to see what the business community are like after this, because you know, you could have done as much stress testing and capacity planning as much as you like, but most businesses don't listen or haven't listened. You know, you talk about DR, you talk about business continuity. You know, you look at now where, you know, all of a sudden businesses find the money to pay for laptop deployment when previously they resisted doing laptop purchases. They just bought PCs, knowing that actually it doesn't give them the mobility and agility that they need. But having to pay £300 per unit more for a laptop than a PC, they always go for the PC. And what I believe and hope to, this will be a stark reminder to businesses, is that business continuity is imperative. You know, you're seeing already from a business situation that most businesses are deferring or freezing all dividend payments so that they can retain cash in the business, probably to pay for all of the additional capital equipment they've had to source in this period. You know, and talking to an earlier point that was mentioned, does it matter about the size? I don't think it matters about the size of the business. It's the culture and mentality of the business. You know, we've seen with businesses, you know, looking to source 600 laptops at a time, you know, because the employee numbers are such a size that they have to have that kind of thing. And I'm sure there have been other businesses who have sourced thousands of laptops. You know, when we got to about the 20th of March, so 2 weeks, well, not even that, just over a week ago, 10 days ago, there was literally hardly any laptops in the channel in the UK. Probably only remanufactured ones, and they were dwindling, and only the very, very expensive workstation laptops that were like £2,500 and £3,000 were left on the shelves. And that's the whole of the UK. And that's from distribution partners like Tech Data, West Coast.
Yeah,
the largest distributors across Europe had nothing in the warehouse. So,
you know, it's scary, eh? That it gets to the point that we always knee-jerk after the fact rather than proper planning, you know, and we just, I guess it's human nature, but I think certainly after this particular incident, I won't say it's going to be a long time getting over this, but you know, from 6 to 8 months to 12 months down the line, I guess, you know, the role of the MSP will become completely different. Not completely different, but it will change, it will morph. And I think people will start to have budgets because they'll start to think, you know what, I didn't plan for that, right? And if I was a business continuity consultancy, which I'm not, I'm sure there'd be a lot of money to be made there, right? Yeah.
Go ahead.
2 points. One to Ian's. The interesting challenge you get with that is if you can get your hands on your laptops for your folks or desktops, they've been sitting in a warehouse for 3 to 6 months. They haven't been patched. They're not gold images. They're not hardened. The list of security challenges that presents are just about endless. And the other problem from an MSSP standpoint, particularly if you're looking at your seams, is your baselines are now all over the map. Your baselines don't work anymore.
But that's an interesting point. I mean, that goes back to the supply chain, supply and demand that the markets can offer in a short amount of time. It also highlights those issues again that we discussed before. More interestingly, we've been talking about these things in the past for many years. And I think the consensus that we used to have, whether it was talking about security mechanisms and talking about disaster recovery and these different types of scenarios, maybe some of the things that we didn't quite get right was highlighting that these events can actually happen and trying to get the lessons learned through tabletop sessions based on these different things that we're going through in reality without going through the pain and the anguish and the capital investment in a short amount of time. And I think an interesting thing I hope will come out of this is that we realize that the security function is not really necessarily there to ensure only that things are secure, but it actually is there to secure the business. And I think the topic that you're talking about, when we are buying all these laptops that haven't been patched in 3 to 6 months, it's also going to highlight, for instance, why do we have a SOC? Why do we have these different functions, these processes and procedures that are responsible for monitoring and managing these different types of assets to make sure that new exploits don't make it into the system? So I think we're going to see a spike, actually, I think, after everything's said and done, because we're buying a lot more devices, we're implementing a lot more devices, we're building up the remote networks and infrastructures. It's going to be stressing the existing infrastructure that we have in the VPNs. But it's also going to highlight how important security is, specifically in a situation like this. What do you guys think?
I will add one thing on top of what you just said. We haven't even broached the subject of BYOD. where the bosses go, hey, you've got a laptop at home, you can just use that.
You see, I am an old school trainer for. I mean, one of my jobs a while ago, quite some time ago, 10 years plus, was I was the risk officer for a bank. From a technical point of view, and it all came my bag, about what do we do and the risk and do the impact analysis, and actually had the authority to put the bank into a business continuity state, right, as and when it was needed. And we always had the train of thought 10 years ago, was centralize everything, control becomes a lot simpler. Hence, we had a huge Citrix estate, right? A massive estate. And it was very regional, and it was global. And it then became irrelevant what device I was on, to a degree, right? And I can control, and then the data actually never left the bank's environment. And so the enterprise security principles already set aside around it. And that was all well and good until the provider itself had leaks in the infrastructure, and then it just slowly just became like a pandemic itself, where there was one leaky bit of code, and it just went nuts. Do you see, from a remote working point of view, and certainly from providing that service to a company, right? How can we make that better so that the average MSP won't go under, or the MSSP won't be sued or go out of business? And for remote working principles, how, should we centralize it more, or should we, how do we attack the problem? Open to anyone really to answer that to start with.
Neil?
Yeah,
I think it's going to be forced on MSPs and MSSPs. It's already written in the stars that everyone's going to be moving to the cloud. So it's going to be centralized. It's either going to be on a mixture of AWS or Azure, or soon to be Google, or all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
There'll be less and less on-premise type servers to manage. And now it's all about how does the managed service provider mobilize and train their staff so that they can understand how to manage and deploy and provision services within the cloud stack. And then reaching out to edge computing management. So then it talks about how you then manage the laptops, the smart tablets, the mobile phones. It's how you actually deliver that. And there's always going to be a requirement for that, because we've talked a lot about the enterprise, but 99% of the market, whether it's in the UK or in the US, are small to medium-sized businesses. They can't afford big IT departments, so they're still going to reach out to a managed service provider community or a managed security service provider community. It's just that the managed service providers, I believe, at the moment, are not skilled enough to deliver the security piece, and there are thousands in the UK and even more in the US that aren't mobilized and trained sufficiently around the security requirements for their clients. And I think that's the big gap at the moment.
Interesting.
It's also interesting when you take a look at, from the security perspective, some of the more recent exploits that we've had. So it kind of makes, it gives me the chills, because recently, within the space of about a month and a half ago, we were discussing that Citrix servers were being exploited. And that was the basis for a lot of this remote infrastructure that we're using today. And now, about a few months ago, I think it was December, the end of December timeframe, where the Citrix exploits were out there. And now we have this pandemic, which is really hitting all these different environments and remote workforces. And it's almost as if you couldn't plan this better than the way it's run. I mean, clouds definitely are a part of the future. If anyone has doubted that cloud computing is part of the future, that discussion's over. That's one thing. So I have to agree with the others. Cloud is here to stay. I think the question is also, that came up just now, a lot of the security providers out there don't have the focus on using open source intelligence as a way to determine what is the actual risk, right? You said before that you worked in banks, and I work for a lot of banks too. And a lot of times the investments are powered by different types of findings based on audits, et cetera. But I mean, what we're finding is that the audits, they're less important than actually ensuring that you can, make sure that your business runs in case something happens. And I think we're going back to, instead of central infrastructure, we're going to decentralized infrastructure. So that means when we do finally go to the cloud, and almost everyone will as a result of this, a lot of people are going to start to think about, when I move to the cloud, how can I disperse my data centers? How can I disperse the areas so that when I have this workforce that works throughout 170 different countries, how can we still make sure that the physical speed issues that we have in our traditional metal-based server and hardware-based infrastructures, how can we alleviate those issues? So I think cloud is going to help us do that, but cloud's also going to help us get a better grip on what security is supposed to be. And I think what that means for the MSSPs, at least my personal opinion, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, is I think we're going to see that these higher level security functions that are extremely expensive and difficult to find the professionals for, that we're going to start to see a merge of MSSPs start to talk to folks like us that do the intelligence to basically help them provide the services when they do move to cloud, to protect the edge network, to protect and audit the cloud infrastructure that they're building up, but also be much more proactive in the research that we're doing on these different types of potential threats. Because a few months ago, Citrix was getting hammered. I mean, we were seeing scans. The first scan that we did with MassScan, I think we found about 200 million IPs that were communicating with these ports, and a lot of them were still open. We didn't advertise this because obviously it's a security risk, but now we have this, and it's starting to tax the system even more. So I think we're going to see a change. Definitely going to see a change. But what do you guys think?
Unfortunately, we believe it or not, we're out of time. Half an hour has gone in like a heartbeat. Quick final thoughts though on that. I'm sorry for them. I'm going to delay it a little bit longer, but very true. What from Michael's comment, Paul? What do you think to that? What do you say to that? Quick answer.
Yeah, so a quick answer. So about 3 years ago, we developed our own MSSP company called CyberGuard, and there is definitely benefits from an MSP having access to that types of functionality. We can be much more proactive because we see the threats early, and we can pass those threats on to our MSP, who can then take the necessary action for our customers.
Richard?
I'm old school. I'll readily admit, when cloud first came on the horizon, I said over my dead body, and I've started to see it for the opportunity that it is. I think the cloud gives us one thing that we absolutely have to have, and that's visibility. It gives us visibility into our infrastructure, and that is the magic that we can start to utilize.
Good point. Ian, final thoughts?
Yeah, just quickly, I think, for the right managed service provider, this is probably the most exciting time for them. I mean, I've been in this industry since 1998, and it was so exciting in the 90s.
Yeah.
It was so innovative, it was different, everything about it. But then it just sort of got a little bit boring around 2010, and a lot of consolidation in the market, but no real groundbreaking technology advancements, not really. But now, if you look at the cloud, the small businesses and the MSPs themselves can take advantage of artificial intelligence, data analytics, blockchain technologies. There's a whole range of opportunities for the managed service provider, because what I've seen over the last 3 years, particularly with the advent of PSA manufacturers like ConnectWise, Autotask, or Datto now and all that kind of stuff, is that there's very little differentiator for the managed service provider. This is a great opportunity for them to leap into a new world where they can provide greater value-added services and not keep racing down to the bottom for price. You know, and I think that's what the opportunity is for a managed service provider.
Yeah, in fact, I agree with all of your comments. In all fairness, you know, the only one thing I'd like to add is I start to see people like ConnectWise and others growing by acquisition, and it not necessarily is the best. And I've seen some really bad examples of that from an acquisition point of view, going horribly wrong.
Yeah.
But there we go. I think we're out of time, and the
Thank you very much.
Pulled me off. Thank you very much, guys. It'd be interesting.
Neil, thank you. Great host.
Really great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
chaps.
Appreciate it.